of middle-income countries have hit the roof of development and cannot develop any further. The status quo is also a world where many low-income countries are locked up in that position and cannot move out of that situation. What this is about is that it is an industrial policy that pushes the industrialization of these countries way further in the way in which it allows these countries to develop further into the future. That is what we propose. Firstly, how will this policy actually look like, realistically speaking? We would argue that this is an extension of pre-existing industrial policy as opposed to investment programs suggested by this opposition team. And this will be done in strategic ways. What does this look like in specific? 3 key points. Firstly, this is likely to be a targeted and concentrated investment on particular industries that are related to pre-existing national industries of those countries. So for example, if you're Chile, you would go for wine industry or aquaculture industry. If you are Brazil or Mexico, you would probably go for the oil industry. If you are Bolivia or countries in Southern Africa, you would probably go for battery companies insofar as you are rich in lithium reserves in the status quo. Secondly, this process is likely to be mediated by financial giants, for example, Citibank, for example, Morgan Stanley. They always do this sort of stuff, and financed in assistance by local conglomerates, giants of countries like, Indonesia, the Salim Group, or in India, the Tata Group. They are likely to be heavily involved in this situation as well. Therefore, it's not really a huge risk to invest insofar as you're being subsidized by local industries that have an interest and stake in these industries to begin with, responding to Ower's suggestion. Third of all, you're likely to invest to be able to reach the 51% bar in terms of the amount of stock that you have in that company. Importantly, this includes a due process where you're likely to have conditions such as, firstly, retaining board members of the company that you're purchasing in this process, insofar as you want to retain things like technology and expertise, but also you're likely to be able to maintain employment as a precondition to investing in these corporations because you want the technology and expertise of existing employees. Why is this then the likely comparative that we stand behind in this debate? Firstly, obviously countries know that they cannot acquire stakes in all multinational corporations, and you have to make a choice. And obviously the likely choice is one that is heavily connected to the current existing industry in the nation, insofar as that is where you're most likely to see the return of profit. But secondly, empirically, this has happened in the past, and there are realistic reasons for why politicians would have an incentive to do so. Firstly, these politicians obviously want the development in the way that people on the ground can feel the impact of that development. They cannot feel the impact of rising prices and, money going into the pockets of politicians. They also want to feel like things like employment given to the people on the ground. That's why politicians have this incentive. But secondly, obviously these politicians are connected with local groups, national companies, or domestic giants. That's why they have an influence in this process as well. That is the reason why this is the likely comparative in this debate. Responses. Firstly, they said, it's risky to rely on few companies. This may be true if you're putting value on capital gain, i.e. if you're planning to sell your stocks and then gain, profit from that process. But our claim is that we don't find any value in that because the kind of technology that these companies have will not change even if stock prices go down. That does not affect our case. Secondly, they said there's a risk of bankruptcy because balance sheet might be, kind of bad. But obviously, the fact that you have due diligence in the process of purchasing these companies means that you won't purchase companies that have a huge risk in the first place. I don't think Goldman Sachs would, risk their reputation by failing to do this process. So I don't understand why that's comparative. So in terms of arguments, firstly, I want to talk about industrial development and how this leads to advanced industrialization. 2 things. Firstly, you're likely to be able to access a high-level technology. In the status quo, what happens is that these countries do not have the necessary technology. For example, in terms of oil extraction, Mexican domestic companies, Brazilian domestic companies do not have the resources or technology to go deeper in to access the oil that's not yet been discovered in the status quo. For example, textile giants, countries that rely on textile, for example, Madagascar, know how to produce these things, but they don't know how to market these things to the global stage, thereby losing a lot of profit margins in this case. Our paradigm is a world where you firstly incorporate all of these technologies together insofar as you have the resources that multinational corporations have, but also secondly, you're able to process more advanced products in the future insofar as you access the necessary technologies to be able to craft cars or electric cars in the future in the case of lithium industry. That's our comparative. Secondly, the status quo is a world where you have many dispersed industrial networks in cases where, for example, like lithium is, extracted in Bolivia, and then there's other parts constructed in Southeast Asia. You bring all of that together to China, and then China gets all the profit. That's the problem in the status quo. And in this case, you don't have the ability to move up the ladder one step at a time as a country that's in the condition like Bolivia. On the other side of the house, you have the capacity to horizontally expand in multiple countries, multiple industries, and benefit from it because you're able to control the whole spectrum of this industrial network. This means that you're able to, as Bolivia, for example, craft batteries unilaterally, and you're able to margin profit off of that in this case. Secondly, I want to talk about expansion to countries that are currently underinvested in the status quo. There are two problems on the their side of the house. Firstly, there's the problem of the race to the bottom. Let me explain this, but before I move on, POIS. Okay. I'll move on. Okay. Right. So, the status quo is a world where countries have to fight against other countries insofar as they want the contract with one multinational corporation. Oftentimes, this is true because many developing countries have shared comparative advantages. So, they tend to offer lower and lower standards. For example, low payment to employees, no technological transfers, environmental destruction, all of that stuff. On the other side of the house, that changes. Firstly, because it becomes a collective effort. For example, like probably Brazil and Mexico would cooperate to purchase one oil giant. Probably like Bolivia and Southern African countries would cooperate to purchase one battery giant. That means these countries now have a collective incentive to benefit all of the country insofar as that's the best way to profit of this company. Secondly, this means that you have expansion to include the most vulnerable countries that are currently underinvested. For example, Mali and Niger currently struggle because they're landlocked and they cannot beat Nigeria in terms of conditions. But if Nigeria, and together with these countries, control one industry or one corporation, then obviously Nigeria has an incentive to expand to Nigeria and Mali insofar as expanding means lowering cost of production, and that benefits all of the countries. But lastly, I want to talk about investment. Currently, you lack it because investors see no realistic opportunity of profit margins from infrastructure projects done by states. On the other side of the house, investors know that there are ample resources in developing countries, so they see an expected future of development. That means they're far more likely to see calculatable profit on the other side of the house and thereby assist in investing in these industries. For those reasons, we propose.
Thank you, Chairperson. I would like to answer 3 questions this way. First of all, what is the counterfactual that the opposition side is supposed to defend in this debate? Secondly, is the small risk worth taking for the bigger utility? Thirdly, what is the unique about acquisition compared to other alternatives? First of all, what is the realistic counterfactual? The closing opposition's main extension is that over-reliance is problematic, and as a result of that, the lowest level of workers will be even more exploited. But those problem is happening right now in the status quo. The over-reliance is the situation that we have observed historically so far in the status quo. For example, Venezuela, the government, a country as a whole, is already super dependent upon one oil company and one oil industry. That's why we'd like to mitigate on our side of the house. By taking the large share of those pre-existing corporations, we can better access better utility and economic outcome and expertise that these corporations have. Therefore, we can rather reduce the reliance by having a collective power against those one company. Secondly, the Tota explained that collective bargaining power across the region, across the one region, for example, collaboration between Brazil and Venezuela and Chile, and those third world countries will unionize themselves and fight against large giant tech or giant conglomerate. And that process is also necessary for us to reduce the level and degree of reliance that we have already observed in the status quo. Therefore, the consequence will be opposite. We can rather mitigate the level of dependency or power and structural power imbalance or disparity between the state and pre-existing large company. And that's the good thing about acquiring the shares. Second question in this debate is the small risk worth taking? This is a direct engagement to opposition. The main case from open opposition is that the financial risk, this acquisition will result in a huge damage in financial risk, and that therefore it damages the balance sheet of the state. Here comes our extension. Our extensions are superior to opening opposition's case for 2 reasons. Firstly, we have explained the realistic context in which this M&A and acquisition happens. And secondly, we fundamentally destroy the underlying simple logic and premise of opposition's case, which is overdependence. How did we exemplify that in our extension? Firstly, when this merger and acquisition happens, usually the government works with the local conglomerates. In the case of Indonesia, the Salim Group is the biggest conglomerate, biggest local group. Therefore, usually these conglomerates are involved in the process of large-scale merger and acquisition led by Indonesian company. And this is very important here because the target is not only manufacturing companies. Salim Group already engaged with over 60 businesses, including development, power plant, natural resources, a convenience store, or local supermarket, electricity, and media, and so on. Therefore, this project of large M&A is very strategic in order to generate national level of industry or industrial complexes is a target and eventual plan of this kind of strategy. Therefore, the likely scenario is that the Indonesia will buy out power plant company, for example, and we will cooperate with Salim Group in order to incorporate newly acquired power plant company into their existing local business, such as nuclear power plant or electricity power plant or thermal power plant. And Salim Group in Indonesia is already successful by trading and exporting those technologies and product to other trading companies in Japan, such as Mitsui Group and Mitsubishi Group and so on. And that's the likely outcome. Therefore, it's very unlikely that we will overly dependent on one single company. Therefore, their stock price will fundamentally damage the balance sheet. Moreover, secondly, before we buy and acquire share, we usually hire financial advisory such as Citibank, JP Morgan, Nomura Security, and Goldman Sachs. And we have ability, and these corporations, institutions have ability to check balance sheet, profit loss, and cash flow statement, and so on. And moreover, Deputy Leader of Opposition conceded that there's a political pressure. Therefore, there is a political pressure from the citizens or voter to compel the government to be accountable on the due diligence process as much as possible. Therefore, it is very less likely that risky investment will rampantly occur and that the government will buy out some random company which have no relation with the pre-existing local industry. Of course, in a contractual level, we check key man conditions such as the key person in the company will not be fired or assigned. We will call it lockup. Like a lockup will be usually 3 years to 5 years. We also proactively secure the salary and bonus and economic conditions for key players within corporations. So therefore, the kind of risk that they're worried about is very less likely to happen. But even if we accept all the risk and financial loss explained by opposition bench, why benefit overrides those small risks? 2 reasons. First of all, in a long term, we think this is a long-term national industrial project. Even though the stock price goes down temporarily, we don't care because what we need is a fundamental technologies or patent or IP that these corporations have. That's what we'd like to leverage by cooperating with existing companies. Therefore, we don't care about short-term stock price. Secondly, the most vulnerable countries right now are underinvested in the status quo, such as Cambodia within ASEAN country. The Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia are very strong. But what about Cambodia and Vietnam? We are able to reach out these smaller and underinvested countries by creating the scheme or structure in which local conglomerates and newly acquired company are able to generate mutual profit. And that's the goal. I'd like to take a point from open opposition if you want to.
So the problem with the case is that it sounds not like buying stock in the open market, but asking local giants to create joint ventures or buying stocks instead of the governments. So what does precisely cooperation with local giants mean? Is it joint ventures or whatever?
No. The motion is about acquire. That means we will take over 50% of the share. We don't have a total control of whatever corporation policies are, but we have large degree of influence over the decision-making process of companies, such as dispatching the board members, and we have ability to veto in the conference meeting as my partner explained in the speech. Therefore, we are trying to target various kinds of public companies, not limited to one manufacturer automobile industry. And that's a realistic context. Finally, why we are better than OG? Because OG's case is at best mitigation of exploitation, right? But I think open opposition explained that there are many other alternative mechanisms to address the issue of exploitation. More than that, secondly, the OG case is dependent upon the incentive of government to be charitable. We don't rely on that. We have a capacity and ability to expedite the process of industrialization by cooperating with local conglomerates and Tata groups in India and Salim Group in Indonesia. That likely outcome is more realistic. We are happy to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, government.